Imagine stepping off a train and walking into a place so crowded, so filthy and so hopeless that men called it hell on earth. Welcome to Scary Stories Files. If you enjoy true horror history and real stories darker than fiction, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe to Scary Stories Files. Now, viewer discretion is strongly advised. In the summer of 1864, deep in Georgia, a Union soldier stepped off a train after days locked inside a stifling boxcar. He was thirsty, starving, exhausted, and he was about to see something he would never forget. Ahead of him was a massive wooden wall, towering logs sharpened at the top, built from tall Georgia pines. The fence stretched in every direction like a fortress. A line of prisoners shuffled forward. The gate creaked open, and through that opening, he saw a human nightmare. Thousands of men packed shoulder to shoulder on bare ground. No tents, no shelter, no shade, just heat, mud, sickness, and silence, broken only by coughing, moaning, and the low sound of desperate voices. This was Andersonville. Officially, it was called Camp Sumter, but to the men forced inside, it became something else, a place where time slowed down and survival was a daily gamble. To understand how Andersonville became what it was, you have to understand one brutal problem every war creates: prisoners. Early in the Civil War, the Union and the Confederacy used prisoner exchanges. Captured soldiers could be traded and sent home, reducing overcrowding on both sides. But as the war intensified, that system collapsed. Battles produced prisoners faster than either side could build camps to hold them. And in the Confederacy, another fear grew just as fast: location. If Union forces pushed south and liberated prisons near the front lines, it would restore thousands of enemy soldiers back into the war. So Confederate planners wanted a prison far away, deep inland, where escape was difficult and rescue was unlikely. They needed two things: distance from the front and a railroad nearby. And that search led to a small spot in Georgia, near a depot surrounded by forests, far from major cities. Construction began in early 1864. The prison's first design was supposed to hold around 10,000 men. But almost immediately, trains started arriving with hundreds of prisoners at a time. The camp wasn't even fully finished before it began filling up. By spring, the numbers rose into the tens of thousands. By summer, it exploded. At its worst, more than 30,000 prisoners were forced into a space that was never meant for that many human beings. If that prison had been counted as a city at the time, it would have been one of the largest populations in the entire Confederacy, packed into a few dozen acres behind a wall. Overcrowding wasn't just uncomfortable, it was deadly. Because at Andersonville, the three most basic human needs, shelter, water, and food, collapsed one by one. First, shelter. There were no barracks, no tents provided, no buildings for prisoners. Whatever protection a man had came from whatever scraps he could find. Some used sticks and torn fabric to build makeshift lean-tos. Others used shirts and blankets stretched like tiny roofs. But the sun was relentless. Georgia heat pressed down with thick humidity, and when storms came, everything turned to mud. Clothing wore out, shoes vanished, skin cracked and blistered. Men didn't just look exhausted, they looked erased. Second, water, a small stream ran through the camp. In any normal setting, it might have been a blessing. At Andersonville, it became a curse, because thousands of men had no proper sanitation. Waste overflowed. The swampy areas grew darker. The creek turned into a slow-moving corridor of contamination. It was still the only water source. Men drank from it, washed in it, tried to cook with it. Some attempted to filter it through cloth, but cloth can't filter despair. As days passed, illness spread fast, not dramatic Hollywood illness. Real illness, weakness, fever, dehydration, collapse. The kind of sickness that doesn't look loud, it looks quiet. A man sitting down because he can't stand up anymore. And once he sits down, he might not get back up. Third, food. Even outside the prison, the Confederacy struggled to feed its own soldiers and civilians. Inside Andersonville, rations were thin and inconsistent. Cornmeal was common. Occasionally meat, sometimes nothing. Men became obsessed with food. They talked about it constantly. What they used to eat, what they would eat, what they dreamed of eating. And hunger changes people, not because it makes them evil, because it makes every thought narrow down to one sentence: I need to live. Inside those walls, the camp developed its own brutal economy. A scrap of food could be traded for a button for a piece of cloth, a piece of cloth for a chance to sleep a little warmer. But as the population grew and rations shrank, even trade couldn't save everyone. Now add one more element: violence. Because a prison is not just a place with guards on the outside. It's also a place where the strong can prey on the weak. At Andersonville, groups formed inside the walls. Some prisoners organized themselves to steal from others. They targeted newcomers. They targeted the sick. They targeted anyone who looked like they couldn't fight back. It wasn't just theft. It was fear. And fear spreads faster than disease. In response, other prisoners formed a group to resist them. Men determined to stop the worst offenders. They created rules. They organized watches. They held their own trials inside the camp. Imagine that. Prisoners so desperate for order that they built a rough form of justice while living in chaos. Punishments were harsh, but the camp had reached a point where prisoners believed that doing nothing would be worse. And all of this happened under the shadow of another cruel rule: the deadline. Inside the stockade, a line was set, not a physical fence, but a boundary. Step past it, and guards were ordered to fire. It reduced the usable space even further. It forced thousands of men inward, away from the walls, away from any thin stretch of airflow or ground that wasn't already claimed. And it created a constant tension. One misstep could mean instant death. Now outside the camp, the war continued. But inside Andersonville, time felt different. Days blended together. Heat, hunger, sickness. A man could arrive strong and within weeks become unrecognizable. The death toll rose, and the camp became known across both sides of the war as a place where men disappeared. Eventually, even Confederate officials who visited the camp were shocked by what they saw. But outrage did not equal change. Supplies remained scarce. Overcrowding remained impossible. And the prisoner exchange system, the one thing that could have reduced the population, remained stalled by politics and bitter distrust. So Andersonville kept growing. As the war shifted and front lines moved, some prisoners were transferred to other camps for a time. But many were brought back again, because Confederate leaders feared Union armies advancing toward those other locations. Imagine surviving enough to leave Andersonville only to be forced back into it. Then, in 1865, the war finally collapsed. Confederate forces surrendered, and Union troops moved to take control of places like Camp Sumter. When they arrived, they found thousands of survivors in terrible condition, men alive, but barely. And they found the evidence of what the camp had become. A prison that was not a battlefield, yet claimed a battlefield's worth of lives. After liberation, the survivors faced another painful truth. Freedom does not instantly repair a broken body. Many needed transport and medical care. Many were weak, sick, and fragile. And here, the story takes one more cruel turn. Because not everyone who survived Andersonville survived the journey home. A separate disaster struck in the post-war chaos, a transport catastrophe that killed many recently freed soldiers, men who had endured the worst camp of the war, only to die when they believed safety had finally arrived. It's one of the most heartbreaking patterns in survival history, when the finish line is visible and the world still finds a way to take everything. After the war, accountability followed. The officer in charge of the camp was placed on trial. Former prisoners testified about starvation, sickness, neglect, and cruelty. His defense pointed to shortages and the chaos of a crumbling Confederacy. But the tribunal did not accept that as a reason for what happened inside those walls. He was found guilty of war crimes, and he was executed. Today, Andersonville stands as a historic site and cemetery. The stockade is gone, but the ground remains, and the numbers remain. Tens of thousands passed through, and thousands never left. Not because they charged into a battlefield, but because they were trapped behind wood walls with failing resources, failing systems, and failing humanity. If this story hit you, leave a comment with one word. Remember. It helps the video reach more people, and it honors the ones who didn't make it out. And if you want more true horror history like this, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Scary Stories Files. Because the scariest stories are real.